Welcome to the Wife of Violence podcast, where we dive deep into topics of personal growth, passion, and leadership, all with violence on our mind. I'm Amber, I'm the wife.
I am Ryan, I am the violence.
And this morning we both woke up and chose violence.
Every day.
And about 5 times today, I think. This is our second time recording this episode. It was bound to happen. Didn't know it was going to happen this early, but here we are. It's also about our 80th time recording the intro because we did a ton of tests and still not 100% sure that we're going to get this one, but, we keep on going. Third time's a charm? What's the second time?
Sure.
All right. Well.
You're not failing, you're not trying.
Okay, good. Well, we've got that checked off. Before we get started, we do want to thank you all so much. We've received a lot of great feedback. We've enjoyed reading comments and reviews and your interactions with us on social media. Please keep it up. Please keep rating the episodes as they come out, podcasts, wherever you listen to them, liking, sharing, giving those reviews. It helps us a ton. So we appreciate you guys.
What she said.
Should have expected that. All right. On this episode, we are calling out Goliath and writing checks our body maybe can't cash as we discuss the benefits of embracing discomfort and doing hard things. This is the way. Are you ready?
If you stay ready.
You don't have to get ready.
Come on.
All right. Well, in the last episode, we discussed using pain as a tool for growth, and it primarily focused on difficulties and hardships being forced upon us versus doing and choosing to do hard things. And while we talked about both, the conversation trended towards what happens to us as a motivator. So I'm sure we'll touch on that topic today. It will be outshined by choosing your own discomfort in this case. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite quotes. I actually sent it to you maybe 8 or so years ago. I don't know if you remember it. It's by R. Buckminster Fuller. No.
It's by who?
Forever ago. R. Buckminster Fuller. There's a whole story about why he chooses to use the R. Anyway, not in this podcast. He was an architect, a writer, and a futurist, which I chose to include because I found it interesting, and I kept finding that term going around. So we'll get there. Or not. Who knows? But the quote is, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." Pause for effect. Oh, shoot. I just think that's such a great, for lack of a better word, subtle way to say do hard things. Don't just settle making another version of something that already exists and fighting to just inch yourself forward in the race. Do something that makes your competition obsolete. They're not even your competition anymore, which is a lot of what we've done through the Fit to Fight programs.
Right. Yeah, and I think it was Henry Ford. I won't get the quote exactly, but he basically said if you, in his time or just before his time, if you had asked people what do they want in terms of travel, transportation, whatever, they would have said a better horse and buggy, a better carriage.
Right.
They wouldn't have asked for a car because nobody was thinking in those terms. It's easier just to look at what currently exists and think, well, how can we tweak that thing? And again, it's finding the easy path, that short term kind of what's right here and right now that I can get an instant kind of gratification or satisfaction, or just get on to the next thing instead of, well, this thing is fine, but could it be something completely different that accelerates my life or, the life of the people around me or whatever it is. But that requires true discomfort, because you have to first recognize that maybe this isn't the best thing.
Along the lines of what you're saying, and I'm glad, the futurist thing came up right away, because there was a BBC clip from Horizon, The Knowledge Explosion, where Arthur C. Clarke is giving his predictions for the future. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you what he's talking about. But he said, if what I say now seems to you to be very reasonable, then I will have failed completely. It goes back to that lateral thinking we talked about in episode 1. If you haven't seen episode 1, go back, listen to it, where you have to be able to think something that seems crazy, seems absurd, but then take it backwards and realize this actually works, this actually fits.
Yeah, and there's a whole like when you first come up with a grand idea, a grandiose idea, something outside of the box, everybody thinks you're crazy. And they resist and they push back and they say, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or she doesn't know what she's doing, or that's just crazy. And over time, assuming that you're actually able to execute on what your idea is and what you're able to show people, and it's successful over time. If it's successful enough, then everybody will get on board. Nobody's, well, I shouldn't say nobody. There's some Amish out there somewhere that are still on horse and buggies. Sure. But generally speaking, everybody's driving cars now because we've demonstrated that that's the more efficient way to move from point A to point B in the way that our lifestyles tend to move now. So the idea of, well, when you say, I'm going to build a combustible engine and I'm going to put 4 wheels on this metal carriage and we're not going to need horses, and everybody's like, that's crazy. I have horses already. I have a carriage already. It works just fine.
Yeah, and if fine were the goal, right, if good enough was the goal, right, we wouldn't be here. One of the quotes this calls to mind is from Stephen Pressfield, and it's, resistance always comes second. The dream or the project is first. There would be no resistance if there weren't a dream. The bigger and the more important the resistance, the bigger and the more important the goal is, the more resistance you're going to feel. And that's related to our fear of failure research. We use this discomfort as an indicator that something matters. Hey, the stakes are high.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like most things. If it's low stakes, I don't really care about it that much. I don't. If I fail, who cares? Because nobody's going to notice. Nobody's going to pay attention. I haven't made a big deal about it. The world isn't making a big deal about it. I can go on and probably be unnoticed. Yeah. And so it's easy to live in those low-lying, low-hanging fruit kind of goals because I don't have to climb the tree to get to that low-hanging fruit. So there's no real risk if I'm unable to get it. But to get the best fruit, I got to climb way up in that tree, and if I fall, everybody's going to know because I'm probably going to break some stuff on the way down. So the risk is higher, but the reward should be higher as well. It's just what risk are you willing to take to reach whatever your goal is, and that's the hard thing. And that's everybody all day, every day is making some internal calculation on return on investment. Mm-hmm. Whatever decisions they're making, it's being processed through some sort of, what's my ROI on this? Right. And that might happen really, really quickly. And it's probably not a conscious thought process in most cases. But then when you start talking about bigger, higher action, more grandiose kind of things, then you sit on that for a while. That you start to really analyze, what is it going to take for me to do this? Whether it's time, money, relationships, whatever. And what am I willing to sacrifice if this does well or if it doesn't? Because there's going to be sacrifice either way. Yeah. There's sacrifice for it to be successful. There's going to be sacrifice for it to fail. And what risk am I willing to take for either of those? And going into it, we've talked about this before with the failure is not an option thing. It's the most readily available option, and honestly, it's probably the thing that's going to.
Episode 2 for those keeping track.
Yeah, and I think
if you haven't watched our episodes, you need to go back.
Yes, and I think Chael Sonnen. I heard Chael Sonnen say it first that failure is the most readily available option. Most people, that sort of discomfort, it's like, well, I don't have to do it.
Yeah.
So if I don't have to do it, if I don't have to make myself uncomfortable, if I don't have to face the odds of failure, why should I?
So I want to take two important roads here. First one, to talk about the violent side of risk and reward, and sparring, rolling, those kind of live sessions is where that most comes to mind. And for me, jiu-jitsu is most readily available right now. If I'm going to try to attempt a submission, what are the chances that I'm going to get it? Like the reward is high. If I can get a submission, I win the match. But then what's the risk? If I don't get this submission, am I in a worse place? Do I give them an opportunity to get a submission? And so a lot of times I'm first going to look for a low risk, decent reward. And if that doesn't work, I'm still in a good position to try the next thing. And maybe I take a little bit more risk to get that higher chance, that higher percentage move.
Yes. And, as skill sets improve, as you have a wider array of options, your toolbox is bigger, you're more willing to take risks.
Right.
It's not necessarily that the risk is less.
You can navigate it better.
Yes, because you've kind of swam in similar waters before. You have a better understanding of what that risk profile looks like and how to mitigate it. But when you're first starting out, you have no idea. And when you're talking about like starting a new business or whatever, people can tell you all day long, well, you need to do this. But until you get in there and actually put hands on and put some real skin in the game, it is very difficult to understand what all is involved in starting a small business. The minutia that goes into the day-to-day of running whatever it is. I honestly, I don't think it matters too much. It could be a coffee shop, or it could be a martial arts training center, or whatever. There's a lot of similarities across the board, and then obviously there's a lot of differences based on whether it's a service or a product or whatnot. But I think the idea that when you're first starting anything new, there's always going to be a level of uncomfortability. But if you're not willing to take that discomfort on, then you never start anything new. You never find out if it's something that might be, your passion, might be your life calling, but without kind of getting uncomfortable, stepping into those waters, you're not ever going to know. And if you relate it to jiu-jitsu or sparring or whatever, we've talked about this before. I need people around me that are supportive. The whole idea of a self-made whatever, that's garbage. Like, that's not a real thing.
No.
I would like to think that that's real, pull you up by your bootstraps and blah, blah, whatever. It's not real. You're not going to get to any level of success, however we define success, without some people somewhere offering you some sort of support, even if it's moral, emotional, psychological, whatever. I'm not talking about necessarily like they gave you a loan or whatever it is. They're offering you some sort of support that gets you through that day. And if it's jiu-jitsu or if it's sparring, it's somebody willing to let you take risks without there being a huge pain penalty for you failing, because otherwise you'll just do the things that you already know or that you're really good at or comfortable with or whatever. And again, you won't grow. You've got these 3 things that you do, and you're going to do those 3 things over and over and over again. And that is a very limited kind of way to approach jiu-jitsu or sparring or life.
There's no growth there.
No, zero.
And it's funny because you might end up being a black belt and you pretty much only do those 3 things, but you have to go through the process of, but you still went through the process of doing all this other stuff and trying and failure and learning and growing until you got back to the other side of it, where it was like, cool, these are my 3 things. And I can still do that other stuff, but I'm really good at these few things.
Well, and I mean, there's like parallels to that too, because you don't know that those are your 3 things or the 5 things or 6 things or whatever until you've tried 100 things.
Right.
And if you're going to get really good at half a dozen things or whatever. I take the Roger Gracie approach to jiu-jitsu, get really good at 6 things, and I think the most successful people in life and business, whatever, they find out what their niche is, their few things that they're really good at, they're passionate about or whatever, and they drill down on those things.
That makes me think of Peter from Carolina Custom Foam.
Oh, yeah.
He has a very specific niche.
Yes.
Where he's doing the foam that you get in like a gun case, and he does other types of work, but those custom insets, he makes them
art.
Amazing art. It's incredible. If you haven't checked him out, Carolina Custom Foam, this is not a paid advertisement yet.
He's right here in North Carolina. Super awesome dude, but man, he does tremendous work. And talk about a niche.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's the nichiest of niches I've ever seen.
The nichiest of niches.
It's incredible, but he's incredible.
Yeah. So on this note, Ryan mentioned startups having a similar learning process, learning curve. We talked about jiu-jitsu having this learning curve of ROI and evaluating it and risk and reward. It applies to a lot of other things, a lot of other sports, I'm sure, at high levels and that sort of stuff. If you're thinking in your mind about something that you are skilled at, and it's maybe not something we're skilled at or something that we've talked about, go to wifeofviolence.com. We have a form there where you can put in your name, your email address, and share some thoughts. We'd love to hear what other parallels this exists in. And maybe it is your startup company and different risks and rewards you had to handle there, but it could also be rock climbing or kayaking, anything on that nature.
Yep. And this is also brand new information to me. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Hey, it's a thing. For now,
so
go
try it.
We're trying to grow. Risk reward.
Yep.
All right. So the other path I mentioned where I'd like to go down on this one is doing hard things just because they are hard isn't the shortcut to take either. Just because you look at this obstacle or this way you could go with your business and it seems really hard, you can't just go, well, that's the hard one, I should do that. And I think that's a mantra you see across the internet pretty regularly. Yes. Oh, is there one that's hard? Well, pick that one. But that's not always the case. And you gave me that lesson, let's call it 8 years ago again. We were doing a Hard Ready course, which is a 12-week program. We've since created a 3-day training series off of it. But basically, there's a nutrition component, there's an exercise component, there are mental, emotional, physical challenges throughout the 12 weeks. And I'll let Ryan talk about it more. But one of our first sprint days, I mean, it's like week 1, day 2 or something, and we're supposed to sprint. And it's the one day we get snow in our area because we get it once a year, except for the last 2 years. It's a little rough, guys. But we're all like in this group messaging like, yes, we're going to go sprint in the snow because we're supposed to sprint and it's snowing and that's hard. Let's go. And you were like, hey, you don't have to go sprint in the snow just because it's hard. And it took me till maybe the research for this podcast for me to realize, oh, the point isn't to do it just because it's hard, because anyone can run outside in the snow.
Right.
But is that going to benefit me based on the goals I'm trying to achieve from the sprinting? And for me, I want to get faster and better with sprinting, and throwing on snow boots and a jacket and running on maybe uneven surfaces in a random area of my neighborhood
is dumb.
Is not the most intelligent thing to do. That could put me more at risk of injuring myself and thus not getting better at sprinting over this next 12 weeks.
Yes. And you could pretty much just write off the next 12 weeks, Yeah. And I'm not saying like there's risk of injury in what we do like that. But again, like I'm not going to take that risk just because
it's there. Right.
It's the idea that I'm going to do a thing simply because it's uncomfortable is just goofy. Like, well, I'm going to touch this stove because I know that I shouldn't, and that's really hard. And no, like, what? That makes no sense.
Yeah.
It's when
the 4 a.m. wake up call working.
Yeah, you don't get extra credit for that. Like, there's no look. If the time you have to work out is 4:30 in the morning, awesome. That's cool. But if your time is 10:30 in the morning or 1:30 in the afternoon or whatever, one is not better than the other. it's not about the time that you do it.
Yeah.
It's about the work that you put in during that time. And so getting up at 4:30 in the morning just so you can post to Instagram, with
picture of your watch
or
and
your sweat angel or whatever. Like,
no one's specific. Just we both thought the same thing.
And again, I mean, it's fine.
Yeah.
But there's no value in doing a hard thing just because it's hard. When I started in Krav Maga, I was with another organization, and the coach courses, the instructor courses were incredibly hard, like physically very, very demanding. And my first phase I think it was 8 days, there was a pretty big attrition rate. Like, we were losing people at a pretty rapid pace through injury, through just F this, I'm not doing this, that kind of thing. And I felt like at the time, I was like, yes, this is awesome. I'm
hardcore.
I'm hardcore. I'm sore. I have to roll out of bed every morning, and I can't wait to get there and see who didn't show up today and that kind of thing. And then I
fell victim to that mindset too.
Yeah. And then I started teaching the courses, and I was like, you know what? This has nothing to do with making a better instructor.
Yeah.
This is hard for the sake of hard.
Right.
And so when people do our courses now, the focus is on, we're going to get uncomfortable, we're going to do hard things, but it's with a very specific goal in mind, to make you a better coach. If that's the ultimate goal, then doing hard things just because they're hard, or just because I'm trying to weed out somebody because of some argument. I train professional athletes regularly, and they are tremendously gifted people. I could smoke them in a workout, no problem, but they could do the same thing to me.
Yeah.
There's no value in that, especially over the long term.
Mm-hmm.
All you do is alienate people. You make them feel like they're lesser than somehow. Like, I should be able to do this because this person in a position of authority is asking me to do it.
Yeah. So that's similar to sprinting in the snow, potentially, right? Based on goals. And then there's the difference of you're in a sparring match and the coach says switch, and you go get a tough person in the room.
Yeah.
Somebody that you would have liked to divert your eyes from.
Yes.
You would have liked to avoid.
Yes.
But you're like, you know what? I'm gonna go spar that person because I know they're gonna make me better.
Yes.
And that discomfort that you chose,
right,
has a chance to improve you.
Yes. And the flip side of it is you could avoid them.
Of course.
You could,
and you'll feel good. You'll leave that training feeling awesome.
Right. And we've mentioned this before. If I have 6 rounds and I smash everybody in 6 rounds, end of the day, what does that really mean?
Yeah. It means you probably didn't grow that day.
Probably not.
You didn't challenge yourself.
And it could mean that I avoided all the hard things.
Yeah.
If I had 6 rounds and there was 12 people in there, it could mean that I purposely sought out people that I knew were not going to push me or challenge me or whatever. But it could also just mean I had a good day. The other people didn't have a great day, or maybe they were letting me work or whatever. Who knows?
Yeah.
Grand scheme of things, it means nothing.
Right.
Long term, do I show up the next day after I got smashed for 6 rounds? That's where the growth is.
Yes.
That's that uncomfortability of not just getting smashed for 6 rounds, but then signing in for the class the next day, getting your gear together, getting packed into the car, taking that ride over to the car, sitting in traffic for 30 minutes, the whole time thinking, why am I doing this? I just got murdered yesterday. Again. That's where the growth happens.
I asked the kids recently, I think everybody listening knows this, but maybe eventually they won't. I teach a youth martial arts class. We're in the jiu-jitsu rotation, and there are tiers. And you teach a class as well, and there are tiers.
Yes.
Kids get upset. Kids get frustrated. And I sat them down and I wrote on a whiteboard, what makes you good? What makes you good? And they said, I was actually really impressed. I wasn't ready to write this much, but they said things like determination, perseverance, studying, practice, skill, all these sorts of things. And I'm like, all right, so here's everything.
No?
Luckily, no. But so I have all these things written on the board.
Losers.
8 to 12, man. 8 to 12. Give them a couple years. So anyway, I have all these things written on the board, and I'm like, all right, well, somebody show me where beating Isaiah yesterday makes you good, or where getting a belt higher than Jacob makes you good.
Yeah.
Those things aren't on here. And then everything on here are things you're in control of.
Yeah.
You have responsibility for those.
Yeah. So I also teach kids classes. It's a new program in Charlotte, relatively new. And I taught kids for 15 years, and then I've been on a 5-year break, I think. And so the kids class in Charlotte is relatively new, and we started sparring maybe 6 weeks ago, something like that. And I sat the kids down on the mats, but I made sure that I drew the parents into the conversation. And I said, look, we're going to be sparring for the next couple of weeks. I am going to guarantee you that over this time, one or more of you will cry. Guaranteed. It's okay. It's fine. I know what's going to happen. There's nothing to be ashamed of for it.
Mm-hmm.
Where the growth is going to happen and where you're going to get better is when the next class comes around and you tell your mom or dad that you don't want to go back because you got pushed that last time. You got punched in the face a little harder than what you were ready for. You got kicked in the whatever it was. That's where you're setting a precedence for every time something gets hard, every time something gets uncomfortable, I stop, I quit. And honestly, I was talking to the parents more than I was the kids because
they're the ones.
The parents are the ones that are going to, one, either support the decision to quit because things got hard, or to reinforce the idea of, look, when things get hard, we don't just quit. And I think parents often choose the easy route because we don't want to argue with them. It's just easier just to not go. It's just whatever.
Choosing your battles.
Yeah,
that can make a huge difference. Yes. This is the battle to choose.
It is, because again, it on the surface and in the here and now, when I'm thinking, well, it would save me from getting in the car, packing all the kids up, getting the other kid, sitting in traffic, sitting there for 45 minutes, whatever.
Excuse you.
And then I got to do it back. So short term, I get it. Long term, the message is, when things get difficult, when I'm uncomfortable, when I am challenged, when things don't go my way, when I touch on adversity, it's okay to just quit.
And even more than okay, that becomes the next step, because that's what you know, that's what you've learned. So, okay, I do this thing, I hit adversity, I quit. I do this thing, I hit adversity, I quit.
Yes.
That just becomes what it is. There's no question. And if we can't sit there and say, well, what if I'm wrong about this? Then
that will carry over into school,
absolutely,
into jobs, into relationships, everything. It will be a life-altering precedence that will be very, very difficult to change. If you're exposed to that sort of a foundation at 8 years old, and it's allowed to persist for the next 8-10 years through your academia, that's going to be really hard to walk away from as an adult.
Right.
So, yeah.
Parents have have to make a lot of decisions throughout the day. And one thing that comes around with this topic of doing hard things, making these hard choices, is decision fatigue, which I kind of went back and forth on about whether that's real. Is that a real thing? I mean, we have studies that show real. Making decisions at the end of the day is difficult, or just before lunch is difficult, and we see it in judges and test taking across the board. Is it something that, like, can you work out that muscle? Can you work out the deciding muscle?
Yeah, I think so. It's like anything else. It's the eat the frog. You know, if I know that I've got a series of things that are going to require my attention today, some harder than others, some requiring more difficult decision making, I need to eat the frog and get it done early. Because as my day goes on and as I'm inundated with things that were unexpected, because I will be, if you're a functioning adult, you are going to run into things throughout your day that are going to derail you. And so if I saved the hard things, the more difficult decisions, the choices that are going to require more of my focus for the end of the day, then decision fatigue is going to be a huge problem for me. I'm going to make rash decisions. I'm going to choose the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to, even worse, push it off and not do it at all because I'm so tired and I'm like, you know what? I'm just not feeling this right now. I'll get to it tomorrow.
I'm sure a procrastination episode will come up. We'll push it off.
Yes, let's do that because I'll be at my best then.
Yeah. A lot of firsthand accounts for that one.
Yes. No, I do think it can be trained, it can be drilled, it can be enhanced, but it also it needs to be gamed.
Right.
You know, it needs to be strategic. It
acknowledged. And yeah. And that acknowledgement is important because people will not just try to procrastinate and push it off and avoid that feeling, but also look for supplements that help try to change it. But that's not how it works. Again, these are stimulus. These are something that I'm going to understand and respond to.
Right.
I think about it like like lobsters. For those of you who know Friends, I was going to do a really horrible lobster friend reference, but I'm going to skip it and get to the actual point of my lobster comment, which is there's a famous YouTube video of Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky, and he's talking about a lobster being a soft creature that lives in a rigid shell. And as it grows, the shell becomes too small. It feels this discomfort and this stress, which signals to the lobster, hey, it's time to go hide. You're going to shed this shell, create a new one. But he jokes that he says if lobsters had doctors, they'd probably never grow. They'd get prescribed some painkillers. They would find a way to fight that discomfort, fight that resistance. Mm-hmm. But we need it.
Yes. I mean, in the lobster's case, it truly is survival. You know, and I do think, especially here in America, I have very obvious firsthand experience here, but we travel a good bit and you see different things in different parts of the world. I think we have a treat the symptoms kind of mentality instead of looking at the underlying kind of causes and problems, because one, that forces me to maybe question the way that I function, the way that I exist, the choices that I make.
Yes.
And then I have to recognize that maybe my choices aren't all that awesome. Mm-hmm. And then I have to recognize that if I am going to get better, I'm going to have to make different choices, which are probably more uncomfortable because that's why I didn't make them in the first place. And it's like, just give me a pill, because that's a lot.
Yeah.
And it really is. If you think about, first, I have to acknowledge maybe something's not right with how I'm existing. Then I have to acknowledge that is based on choices that I'm making. Then I have to acknowledge I'm making those choices because they're easy. And then I have to say, okay, well, I'm either going to do something about this or I'm not. And in the case of the lobster, truly to survive, the lobster has to go hide under a rock,
Go do something.
Shed this shell so it can grow a bigger, stronger one, and then get back out into the world. We go find a pill, get an injection, whatever it is, have surgery.
Yeah. I do think that takes a lot of introspection. There is a pretty big push right now to be able to give yourself some rest and self-care. I think human nature, this is a topic coming up in the future. We tend to do this hard pendulum swing from one side to the other side. I'm going to leave that on the table right now. That's just a quick foreshadow at things to come.
Yeah, because don't get me started on self-care.
No. So we have all this introspection it takes for this. And I'm going to give a super obscure reference. I think it's obscure. And it's a quote from Suits, the show Suits, where Louis Litt is acting as Harvey Specter for a day. And this was an amazing episode. By the end of it, he comes clean and he's confessing. And he says, I just had to realize it's great being Harvey, but I'd rather be me. And so much of the 8.5 seasons prior to this episode is him fighting who he is and trying to be somebody else. This discovery comes big for him.
Yes. Well, it's hard to. It's like social media. How many? If you go on social media right now and you look through your feed, you're going to see just a deluge of people complaining about things and people and organizations and companies and corporations and whatever. All things that they really can't affect.
Yeah.
Because it's easier to spend energy on that than it is to look inside and say, you know what? The thing that I can actually affect, the thing that I can actually change is me and this 3-foot circle around me. But it requires me to, again, acknowledge where maybe there's some shortcomings, acknowledge how to fix it, and acknowledge that it's going to be uncomfortable. Where I can just, go yell at clouds instead, or I can wonder what it would be like to be Harvey Specter and try to be Harvey Specter instead of owning who I am as Louis Litt and being the best Louis Litt that I can be. By the way, if you've never seen Suits, Louis Litt is a character that, and I told Amber this when she first started watching it, I said, you will never find another character that you will love and hate so many different times in a series, sometimes in the same episode. This dude, you will absolutely think he's the worst human ever, and then you will be like, oh, that was the nicest thing. Yeah.
I loved every second of it, and but I would literally text him like, "Oh, Louis is so great," and then 5 seconds later, "Oh my gosh, he's horrible."
Yep.
It's a fun roller coaster. I enjoyed it.
It is, but again, most of it does go back to him not being comfortable, just being who he was, and making himself the best Louis he could be.
Yeah. Would you rather be a lion or a panda? I'd rather be me. Yeah. Ted Lasso. Listen.
Yeah.
You guys have a lot of homework to do if you haven't seen Suits or Ted Lasso, because you have a lot of episodes to catch up on.
Yes.
So on that note, brings the concept of The Gap in the Gain by Dan Sullivan. Have you heard this before? Other than the last time we recorded this podcast? It's been a while, honestly.
And honestly, I don't.
He doesn't.
I do this mental dump pretty much every day because I have so much stuff in my brain, and things that I don't absolutely have to retain pretty much gets just chucked at the end of the day. So
this is all brand new.
This is like doing it for the first time for me.
So the gap in the gain is this concept that can delineate a happy achiever from an unhappy achiever. There are people that are successful in doing things, but they're unhappy about it. And the gap in the gain is how we look at where we've started, where we are, and where we'd like to be. The gap is looking at where you are and where you want to go. And we can measure that, but if that's what we value, that's going to make you a very unhappy achiever. You may have moved from your starting position, but that's still a really large position from where you want to go.
Yeah.
The gain is where you started to where you are. And sometimes that looks smaller, but that's what we want to place our value on rather than, but that's going to give us those feelings of optimism. Okay, look how far I've come. Not just look how far I have to go.
Right.
That shifts your mindset about you, about other people. And then if you start looking at their projection, not even knowing really where they started or where they're going, it just seems like they're so much further along from you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's comparison is the thief of joy kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things what other people are doing, how well or how not well they're doing, only affects me to the degree that I allow it to. That's it. That's a choice I'm making. I am making a choice to allow what someone else is doing to affect how that makes me feel. And if we're talking about the gap and the gain, and I've set a goal for myself, and maybe it's a very hard line kind of thing, or maybe it's something a little bit more arbitrary. And I created this, to use Darren Hardy's term, big, hairy, audacious goal, with the idea of, if I fall somewhere underneath that, it's okay. I'm shooting for the stars on this thing, though.
Yeah.
But with the understanding that 1% better every day is still 1% better. It's still better than I was the day before. And when we do coach courses, I tell people all the time, look, at the end of your 45-minute class or the end of your hour class or whatever, are your students better than they were when they got there? And if the answer is yes, then that was a successful class. It doesn't matter how much better they are,
right?
Because we're not trying to do it all today.
No.
And look, tomorrow they might take a step back. That's life. That's how it goes. But from a coach's perspective, any sort of gain is a win. And we have to frame that for students as well, or parents and kids or whoever. Any gain is a win. Any gain is a success. I might not be where I want to be, but I'm beyond where I was, and that kind of mindset, that kind of mentality. Because if you only focus on the gap, eventually, I think, now some people are just driven that way,
right? Yeah.
But most people, if you only just focus on the gap and you don't take time to acknowledge the gain, then it gets really frustrating over time, and it becomes a bit toxic and a bit caustic, and it can almost create negative kind of connotations to where you start coming up with reasons and excuses that you're not where you want to be. You're not where you should be. Maybe I should do this instead. And now, not only am I not getting better, I'm getting worse because I'm not even working on that thing anymore.
It's a twist on self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes.
Where because you're so focused on this negative thing,
yes,
you start falling backwards to a degree.
I mean, and to tie it back to, the way we coach, the way we teach, we talk about, look, I don't want to always work from a position of extreme negative, because that's where I'm going to find myself.
Yeah.
I want to be preemptive. I want to take control of variables as I can and as they come to me. And in life, I think that's important too. I don't want to always find myself behind the 8 ball, or where I'm always having to struggle to get out from behind that thing. I need to acknowledge the little things that have gotten me to this point. Yeah. Because if I don't, I truly believe if you just focus on that gap, you just focus on what you haven't achieved, mm-hmm. you probably will never really see the gains that you want to see, because
you're not looking at them.
You're not, and your focus will continue to dissipate. because you're going to get so frustrated with how far you still supposedly have to go.
Yes.
That your attention will be drawn to other places, and sooner or later that goal will be a distant memory.
Yeah. You mentioned Darren Hardy, so I want to wrap this up on that note. He talks a lot about the compound effect and how bad humans are at realizing how much that little 1% right now can compound into the future.
Yeah.
And that's coaching.
Yes.
I know you can't do 98% of this move right now, but that 1% you learned today, that makes a big difference.
Yes. Just a quick on that. I did a call this week with a coach that was in our grounded course in San Antonio a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And he had a couple of questions. And one of his questions was, if we're doing a warm-up, for example, and I've got a student that can't do rock no rolls, what do I do? I said, let them try it. Let them go in circles. Let them go 2 feet and then bear crawl it out. And then they do it again next time, and maybe they get 3 feet. And then they do it again next time, and maybe they get 4 feet. But I don't want to just say, you don't have to worry about it. Don't do it. Unless there's some kind of injury that's keeping them from doing it.
Yeah.
It's a hard thing to learn. It's a hard thing to do. But just because you can't do it right now doesn't mean that you won't be able to do it in a month. And just because the rest of the class is going all the way down the floor and you're only getting 3 feet and then you're bear crawling out, that's okay, because next time you're going to get 4 feet, and the next time you're going to get 5 feet. Don't look at how much mat space is left. Look at how much mat space you've covered.
The gap in the game.
Yes.
I love it. And try it. Do it.
Yes.
Because a lot of times as a coach, you explain, you show, and then you tell them to go ahead and try it.
Yes.
And you come over and somebody's just standing there and they're like, I don't know what to do. And I'm like, well, I can't help you if you don't try. You have to start.
Yes.
And now I can, and even if it could be 100% wrong, but now I have something to work from.
And starting is always the hardest part, but it's also the most exciting part.
Yes.
If you look at it that way. So let's end it.
It's never going to end. That's our look at embracing discomfort, the power of doing hard things. If you didn't enjoy this podcast, keep it to yourself. Stay off of social media. Go on with your life as usual. If you did enjoy this discussion, please follow, share, subscribe to notifications. Get your next episode releases delivered right to your phone. And on that note, if you have a better day or time that you'd like us to release podcasts, now is the time to let us know. You guys are the OG listeners. Tell us so we can help make your lives better. Thanks for listening to Wife of Violence. We look forward to growing with you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
I hope that recorded. That one went long.